Hello there, Drew Hanish of Whiskey Lore. It is time for another Tasting Tuesday video. I have two for you this week. Two! And the reason is because I had teased that I was going to do a video about the banana note in Jack Daniel's and where I think that came from. But as I was putting together my notes, I realized that I stumbled into a whole different concept. I was trying to find something to pair up with Jack Daniel's. I got multiple suggestions from you guys on Instagram, and I was thinking about Old Forester, but I had done an Old Forester review in the past, and so I also got a recommendation for Four Roses Single Barrel. When I got to the store, I ended up walking home with a bottle of scotch instead of a bottle of Four Roses Single Barrel. And I have the small batch, and I thought, well, I could do that. Or I had gotten a little bottle of the small batch select, and I thought, oh, well, there's actually something very interesting about this whiskey that I can use in my comparison against Jack Daniel's. So that's coming up in the next video, but this video I'm going to be focusing on a particular mystery that has followed my Jack Daniel's experience for the last 2 years. Ever since I could taste it and sort of get more nosing and understanding some of the flavor characteristics of the whiskey, the more I started noticing that I could pick a Jack Daniel's whiskey out versus just about any other whiskey. And it was because of one particular flavor and nosing note. And that is banana. Now, when I put together my little flavor wheel, banana is included at the top of the fruit side of the wheel, but it's not something that I taste very often. And I do have this curiosity that says, well, I'd love to really detect and figure out, to improve my tasting skills, if I could figure out and make a connection and say, okay, banana note comes from barrel, yeast, amount of aging, how long fermentation process is. There are so many different variables that can add a particular flavor to a whiskey. And so I wanted to find out if I could, like I have with a nuttiness, figured out that that's coming from the oak, that where does this banana note come from? What causes banana in Jack Daniel's, but not very many other whiskeys? Well, while I was out in California doing a tasting of 100-year-old whiskeys that I didn't know where the whiskeys came from or anything about them other than they're 100 years old, they've been sitting in these carboys. And one of the whiskeys that I tasted was heavy on the banana influence. In fact, I said, you know what? I almost would say this might be an old Jack Daniel's. It may be a 100-year-old Jack Daniel's. But that's making an assumption. And the assumption is that the Jack Daniel's that was made 100 years ago is exactly the same as the Jack Daniel's of today. And I don't believe that's true. And here's the reason why I don't believe that's true. Because no matter what yeast they were using 100 years ago, the only way that yeast would survive through Prohibition, which went much longer for Jack Daniel's than it did for a lot of other distilleries, because Tennessee went into Prohibition around 1910. Jack Daniel's went off to first St. Louis, then down to Alabama, and then it wasn't until Lem Motlow really fought to get the distillery back by having to become a government official to get laws passed to be able to do distillation back down in the Lynchburg area. And so 1938. So we're talking 1938 from before Prohibition. So, I mean, that's a good more than 13. We're talking 18 years plus probably. And so what happened to that yeast during all those years? And as Nelson Eddy, the chief historian at Jack Daniels, and I talked about, I mean, somebody would have had to have been baking bread or do something to keep that yeast alive that long. And so the yeast that came before is likely not exactly the same yeast that was used after Prohibition. So that's going to make a difference in the whiskey. So you'd have to say that, okay, if banana were in Jack Daniels before Prohibition, then it's something other than the yeast probably that's doing it, or maybe there's just a wild yeast strain around Tennessee that brought that right back into the whiskey. So when I got back to South Carolina after my trip to Los Angeles, I brought by the reward to Krista, the biochemist who had helped in getting the chemical analysis on these 19 whiskeys that I tasted out in California. And so I delivered to her her gift, which was a couple bottles of whiskey. And then we sat and we talked for a while, and she's really fascinating to talk to. She knows more about yeast than I think a lot of distillers know about yeast. And we just started, talking about yeast strains and how they develop and how they evolve. And we got around to discussing that banana note. And I said, it's really interesting because every time I have a Jack Daniels, doesn't matter if it's Jack Daniels Rye, if it's Jack Daniels single barrel, if it's old number 7, there is always a nose of banana and of that oak. So it's kind of a nutty banana, and so I call it banana nut bread. And flavor-wise, it also has that. And it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't matter if it's the rye, it doesn't matter if it's the regular Tennessee whiskey. And so I said, I'm just trying to figure out, where could that come from? Is that coming from the yeast? And she went, banana. No, she said, that is coming from a fungus. There is a fungus that can attach itself to a yeast strain and it delivers a banana note. And all of a sudden, light bulbs went off. If you've ever been to the Jack Daniels Distillery in Lynchburg, Tennessee, and you take the tour, one of the things you're going to notice is that there is a lot of untamed black fungus all around that distillery. Tons of it. Now, it's known as the whiskey fungus. The correct name for it, and bear with me, Baudonia campniacensis. That is the official name of the fungus that likes to grow up around distilleries, especially around maybe where you're doing the distilling, but also in the warehouse, where the angel's share is letting off bits of ethanol, and ethanol is what this fungus feeds on. So call it a great whiskey fan, because it is there and it is getting involved with this ethanol. And Jack Daniels really doesn't. It's probably the one distillery where I have seen the most of that fungus around, and I almost take pride in it when they're showing you around and they show you it's collecting on trees, turns trees black. And this used to be a way that the IRS agents were able to track down moonshiners, because if they saw black trees, they knew there was some distilling or some whiskey aging somewhere nearby, and so that was their clue to be able to figure out. So you could be a moonshiner. Didn't really matter if you were storing a barrel somewhere and it was collecting this black fungus around the area. Somebody, an agent, didn't have to see the smoke from your still. They could just go inspect the trees around and figure out what you were doing. So if it's true, and this is by no means conclusive, but putting 2 and 2 together, it really would make sense to me that because they allow that fungus to just hang around the area, maybe that fungus is also working its way into the yeast strain and is creating this banana note that you get out of Jack Daniels. Now, there are only there's three other whiskeys. There's Nika Super Rare, I think it's called. I had it in a tasting box one time, and I tasted a banana note in that. I've tasted it in this S.E. Callahan's, which comes out of eastern Tennessee. Now, part of me would think, well, maybe, I don't know, maybe it's a Tennessee thing. Hard to say. And then Teeling, I need to find out from Teeling whether they use Jack Daniels barrels or not, because it's very possible, Irish whiskey and Scotch are usually put into used American barrels. And if they're using Jack Daniels barrels, it could be that they're pulling some of that banana note out of the Jack Daniels barrel. Hard to say, but it's a really interesting thing, and I wanted to share it with you because it has been one of those great mysteries for me. And I have some people that say, wow, I've never smelled banana in Jack Daniels. Do it. Put your nose to it and hunt for that banana, because it's actually a whole lot more prevalent than you might imagine. And like I say, it doesn't matter which Jack Daniels you get. It's probably a little weaker in Gentleman Jack, but it's double filtered, and so it likely is maybe losing some of that. But that is where the banana note, in my opinion, is coming from, is the black fungus, the whiskey fungus that's hanging around outside of Jack Daniels. Maybe someday we will find out for sure, but I thought it'd be really interesting to share with you that the banana note in a whiskey likely is coming from a fungus that is attaching itself to the yeast. All right, and next video, we're going to go and talk a little bit about Four Roses and Jack Daniels and this process of chill filtering. So I'm going to get on my soapbox in this next video, and so it'll be an interesting one, but all in an effort to help you understand the whiskey that you're drinking beyond the tasting notes, and really kind of getting into the process of making whiskey as well, and how you determine a good whiskey from a average whiskey. So until next time, cheers, banana notes alive, and Slanjava.